you're weighing yourself every day, it's a total invalid measurement of what is actually happening. Eating foods filled with chemicals and sugar is not great for you. Keeping metrics is important so you can make sure you're on the right path, your macro balance and how often you eat throughout the day.
If someone comes to you and says, I want to start losing weight, how do they start?
There's some hard and fast rules that generally apply to human physiology. The first thing I would say is
Andy Speer is a powerhouse Peloton instructor, former elite pole vaulter, and strength training specialist.
He's known for his high-energy classes and expert coaching in strength and conditioning.
You said you've tried a number of different diets. What were some of them, and did any of them work?
Nutrition is so individual. I eat a ton of dairy, meat, cheese. I got really lean on that.
I'm curious about what the difference between paleo and keto would be, because they kind of sound the same.
Paleo, you're welcome to eat carbohydrates, but only of a certain nature. Sometimes you have to go to an extreme in one direction to say oh, the keto really worked for me. Do I maybe have to live in keto all the time, every day? Maybe not.
But I want to stay as lean as possible.
Whether you're trying to gain muscle or lose any amount of body fat, you need to be
We find it very interesting that the majority of you who watch and listen to this show aren't yet subscribed to our channels across Spotify, Apple, YouTube. It would mean the world to us if you can do us that small kindness. It allows us to continue to bring on amazing guests week after week and continue to provide you with amazing value and content. It's the only thing we'll ever ask of you. If you can hit that follow or subscribe button, it would mean the world to us. Thank you so much and enjoy the episode. Andy, welcome to Gent's Talk.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Same.
We were just talking before we started recording about diets and lifestyle and how often you eat per day. So you said you eat somewhere between 3 to 4 times a day. And I'm asking this because obviously the nature of not just your job, but your lifestyle is to stay active, to stay fit. So what you eat, how often you train is all important.
Yeah.
And so you said you've tried a number of different diets over the years. What were some of them, and did any of them work?
So, back in 2010-ish, I was really into the paleo diet when it came out.
And that one is?
So that one is basically taking the grains out of it, mainly gluten-free. You eat a lot of protein, a lot of beef, a lot of chicken, sweet potatoes.
Yeah.
Fats are cool. I eat a lot of sweet potatoes, beef, and butter.
Okay.
But no sugar, no grain carbs.
No green carbs?
Grains. Like
okay.
potatoes, like a starchy carb,
Yeah.
but no gluten grains or anything like that.
Okay.
So that worked. I got really lean on that. I feel like I maybe needed some more grains in my life. I'm not going to lie. But nutrition is so individual. And somebody asked me about it last night at our meet and greet, and I was like, it's so individual. I eat a ton of dairy, a ton of meat, a ton of cheese. I have Scandinavian and Nordic heritage, so that makes a lot of sense for me,
Sure,
right?
yeah.
Somebody from more equatorial heritage doesn't get along with dairy so well, but they do really well on a more plant-based diet with a lot of fish, and it just makes sense for them. So, there are kind of some hard and fast rules, eating foods filled with chemicals and sugar is not great for you. But as far as your macro balance and how often you eat throughout the day, it's so individual that self-experimentation, with some guidance from somebody who knows what they're doing is really, really helpful.
I remember I did keto, and I'm curious about what the difference between paleo and keto would be, because they kind of sound the same.
Similar. Paleo, you're welcome to eat carbohydrates, but only of a certain nature.
Oh, right. The sweet potatoes,
sweet potatoes,
for example.
stuff like that.
Right.
But there definitely are carbs involved in paleo.
Okay. So I stumbled upon the keto diet in 2018, 2019. And so I come from a Middle Eastern background, which is full of rice and potatoes and bread. There's so much of it. Every meal consists of one of those 3 things. And I was just finding myself consistently bloated and tired and sluggish, and that afternoon crash. And I don't drink coffee, so I really felt those afternoon crashes after a heavy meal. And then I stumbled upon the keto diet, and I was like, okay, well, I'm going to try this, but this is going completely against the grain, literally, because I have a cultural bias towards having this kind of food. And it worked. It was incredible. I think I went from 205 to like 160 in a matter of 3 months. It was intense.
Yeah.
It was a significant shift. And it also makes me wonder more and more about, not wonder, it's made me more conscious about what we eat and what we put into our bodies more regularly.
Yeah. And I think that's the big thing, is the consciousness of how what we put into ourselves affects us.
Yeah.
And, sometimes you have to kind of go to an extreme in one direction to get some feedback, get enough feedback to say like, oh, the keto really worked for me. Do I maybe have to live in keto all the time, every day? Maybe not.
Yeah.
But can I bring it back a little bit and say like, okay, these are some appropriate carbohydrates for me that if I'm training for something high performance where I need that extra little bit of fuel, I now know like what amount and what type of carbohydrates work for me. But most of the time I live on a more of a very low carb, protein, fat type diet. And it's that experimentation with oneself that I think is important, and pushing to, when I say extremes, just like doing something for long enough so you can get some feedback. Doing something for 3 days, you're not going to notice.
Yeah.
3 weeks, yes. 3 months,
time.
definitely.
Yeah.
And so, again, like that's a great example of, you taking the reins and saying like, I'm going to try this for myself, see how it reacts. And now I know how my body reacts to this. And it's the same with nutrition, the same with exercise. There's some hard and fast rules that generally apply to human physiology.
Yeah.
But then there's a lot of nuance within each individual, based on, background, physiology, lifestyle, all of that really make a difference in how, what you eat and how you train affect you.
Yeah. Was your background always in fitness and nutrition, or did you kind of stumble into this industry?
So I grew up, I was doing gymnastics from when I was, 6 or 7 years old.
Yeah.
So I started, rolling around on the mats as a little kid, and then started competing. And I was a competitive gymnast up until about sophomore year in high school. And, gymnastics is one of those sports where it kind of takes over your life, and as a young man, especially, like there was no male gymnastics in our school. So we'd go to this gym that was a town away, and it was kind of this ragtag bunch of other kids, like 12 other boys from all these surrounding towns. And we'd come to this gym, and it was, you have like 3-hour practices, like 4 or 5 days a week. So you kind of spend your life there. And it was definitely like a place of solace for me there. I was, and I've shared this story before. Like I grew up, I had big ears that stuck out. I was like a little bit awkward in my own skin. I was very insecure, but gymnastics was something that I was really good at, and I loved and I enjoyed, and I had a passion for it. So it gave me that kind of opportunity to, in a way, build that confidence in myself. The flip side of that is like I was the only boy in my entire town doing gymnastics.
Right.
So, I would, and I didn't get like bullied
isolating
for it, but it was, it's like, oh, the gymnastics kid, but, it really, that set a foundation for me physically to be able to do, I eventually transferred and started running track and became a pole vaulter, went to college for pole vaulting. So, it really set a foundation for me to, one, go through collegiate sports, but also later on in my life, like pull from everything I learned in gymnastics, in track and field, to what I'm doing now at some level. So I was definitely active my entire life, and competitive with sports through college. My 20s, I kind of floated around. I was like trying to be a model, and like spent some time living in Europe, and like I really had I didn't know at that point this is what our 20s are for, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I didn't really know there was a career in fitness, if you will, at that point. It wasn't something, I think I had my mind kind of like glued on this modeling thing, and coming from being a little kid who I put everything that I was worth, to a large extent into like how I looked, because I felt so awkward, because I felt so different because of my ears. And, when somebody picked me up to be a model, it was like, wow, what do you mean, me? You know,
I bet,
and
yeah.
it, and I still I'd grown my hair out, so it was covering my ears in college. I was still living this kind of like internal life of, I will even say, fear in some ways, but that, lack of confidence in myself because of how I looked, even though there was a lot of, I was, president of my fraternity. I was like doing all these overtly, outward things that looked very kind of manly and in charge. I'd put on a lot of muscle from lifting weights in track, and I was like a good looking guy. There's still a lot of insecurities within me. One based on how I looked, and then two, I think a lot of feelings like, undiagnosed ADD, some depression that was like swirling around, and I didn't really know what I was doing with my life. So all of those things, and, it was early 2000s, and we didn't know about or talk about like this stuff at that point.
Especially not for men.
Especially not for guys.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's, that was a kind of, and I eventually got my ears pulled back. I was like, I asked my parents, I was like, finally, can I need this? Cause I'm going to be a model. Right. And so, and I was in that world for, I don't know, maybe like most of my mid 20s. And then finally found my way back to New York, and still trying to like kind of chase that dream a little bit. But, I had gotten a job at that point. I'd gotten a job at an Equinox as a personal trainer. I got my personal training certification. My mom and one of her friends were like, "You're in the gym all the time. Just like, this might be a good thing for you to do." Right. So I was like, okay, I did it. And that was a big turning point for me as far as like being able to, and this is me super green, as a working in fitness as a trainer, but showing up, and it was something that I felt was kind of natural and innate in me, was my like desire to see someone else succeed. Yeah. And this was my way of going about it. Right. So that was a really big turning point for me, just working as like an overworked, underpaid personal trainer in New York City, which we all were, but we had a blast. And I was like, this is cool, man. And I put a lot of time and work into learning the craft, learning the science, learning the art, spending a lot of time with people one-on-one, which, looking back, and maybe I hadn't even thought about it till this moment, that gave me, again, it started to very slowly build my confidence in my ability to communicate and to have interpersonal relationships, which was something that was always very challenging for me. And when you're a personal trainer, people share things with you. I bet. That, they don't even tell their doctors sometimes, or their spouses, or you're their kind of, almost like their third party therapist that like, you don't have all the answers, but you and it was like, oh, they're, all these really successful people have a lot of issues also. And
they all do.
Everybody does, and developed some really great relationships there also, which has lasted, some until this day. So, I guess that's kind of when my story as far as like, was I always in health and fitness? At some level, yes. Yeah. But it took me a long time and a windy road to kind of find, at first, personal training, and then I got into doing some fitness modeling, which was different than, modeling the sweaters and the underwear and stuff like that. And this was like working with brands, like the Men's Health and the Reebok, where I was like, first you start just shooting exercises, the little old black and white pictures in the Men's Health. But then I was just really fortunate to be, I'll say I was in the right place at the right time around the right people. I'll also say I was really, really working hard at taking advantage of these opportunities. And started to create some fitness, write some programs, create content. And I was like, okay, we're actually doing something that's giving value back. And that was, I think, an important thing for me to be a part of along the way. And then that, kind of the next 10 years in New York had a lot of great opportunities, which, eventually led me to where I am now. But I think the adding value through what I do, through these different outlets, was really important. And I don't know if I necessarily like keyed in on it at the time. It was more just a feeling of like, this is the right thing to do.
Well, you're lucky because you've aligned your work with your purpose.
Yes.
A lot of people search for that.
Yeah.
Something that gives them fulfillment, but also pays their bills, if you
Right.
will.
Yeah, totally. I definitely very much realize that, and am very, very grateful that, you know, this path has allowed me to do that.
Yeah.
Very, very aware that, you know, I have an amazing, we call it a job right now, but like this is what we do every day. It's so much more than a job, and been really lucky to like.
Well, tell me about it. What exactly is it that you're doing with Peloton? Like, how'd you get to Peloton? Because I remember, and this is a personal thing, I hadn't heard, you know, Peloton to me popped off during the pandemic because they did this incredible pivot, it seemed. At least they sort of were able to support people without people having to physically be anywhere other than in their own homes. And then it just sort of took over, it seemed. Like, it seemed like everybody was talking about Peloton. Everybody had a Peloton bike or treadmill, whatever the case may be. And how did your journey lead you to Peloton?
Yeah. So I was working at the gym, personal training, developed a good friendship with a couple of guys there, and we decided to leave and start our own studio, our own gym. So we did that in like 2013, opened our own training facility. It's called Strength Lab. It's still there. I still go back and work out there, which is pretty cool.
Oh, cool.
And you know, that in itself, it was the first time I've ever, you know, like opened a brick and mortar business of any kind. And I'm certainly not like the business mind behind things, but you know, it was a great experience. It was, you know, the first year, I don't know if you've ever opened a brick and mortar space before, but the first year you're there, it's intense, man. You're there 6 a.m., 11 p.m., like, you know, drilling pull-up bars in the wall. I love, you know, you're just so in it that there's no other thing that you want to do.
Yeah.
But so we opened that gym, and along that time too, I was continuing to work with brands like Men's Health and Reebok and creating content for them and getting more time in front of the camera, you know, doing videos, doing shoots, that kind of thing. And I was there for about 3 or 4 years. I ended up leaving Strength Lab to open another space. And it was about that time that, you know, the New York fitness world it's pretty small, especially back then. Everybody kind of knows each other.
Yeah.
And, you know, funny story that my current wife, Rebecca, was the one who was at that point in charge of, you know, hiring and casting for the new squad of Peloton instructors who were going to do the tread and the strength.
Okay.
So she had actually asked me one day in the summer, you know, presented me this opportunity, and I was like, I'm opening this other space. This is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to like decline. And I didn't know anything about Peloton. Most people didn't at that point, unless you had the bike.
Yeah.
Like this was 2017,
Okay.
18,
Yep.
you know? I was still in my like brick and mortar gym world, right?
You were trying to figure out how to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah. And, you know, 6 months later, I was very lucky that they called me back and they said, you know, we want you to come in again, or come in for the first time. And at that point, there were some other things going on in my life. It was a little crazy. So I was like, okay, I'm going to give this a shot. And things, you know, got the job.
Yeah.
And things just kind of went on from there. I started there in 2018. But, you know, definitely everything, you know, and this is kind of a lot of people, everything you've done up to that point prepares you at least to start this next opportunity. And you don't really realize what you're preparing yourself for necessarily. Some people maybe have the 10-year vision and they work backwards. I was never one of those people. I'm always like, I'm going to do the best I can with what's in front of me. I've always had trouble, and I think some of it is this, you know, the confidence, envisioning myself being somewhere 5 years from now, doing great things. I always had, and I still do, have a very hard time imagining and envisioning myself being somewhere but the present.
It's a good place to be.
It is a great place to be. So for better or worse, you know, there's it's a great place to be. And if you put your mind and focus into the present, you get a lot done.
Yeah.
There's also something to be said for working towards a future goal.
Sure.
And so, you're kind of, it's a
dance between the two.
That's a dance that I've, walked most of my life, mostly living in the near term.
Yeah. I'm curious to go back briefly to the personal training piece.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people that watch and listen to this podcast who are very vocal about wanting to know more about how to fix their fitness routines, some of the pitfalls to avoid. Coming out of the pandemic, a lot of people were like, listen, I think the pandemic, personally speaking, has really sort of pulled the curtain back on why it's so important to prioritize your physical health, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a tie, I believe, between your physical, mental, and emotional health. Like if one is off from those three pillars, you're going to feel it in every other area. Physical health is one of those things that you can quite easily integrate every day of your life, right? It's one of the easiest things to start doing. You can literally start right after this. What's, in your experience as a personal trainer, working with Peloton, from the people that you talk to, what's one of the things that you're seeing is the biggest barriers for people when they want to start their fitness journey?
Yeah, so you use the word easiest as far as starting or carrying on a physical exercise routine, and it seems easy. I'll use the word, and this is a Dan John quote. He's one of my favorite strength coaches. It's simple.
Okay,
right?
That's a better word.
But it's not necessarily easy for a lot of people for whatever reason. There's mental blocks. We can set up so many roadblocks for ourselves. There's a fear of, something new, something unknown. There's physical discomfort. Our society these days, and it's kind of swings back and forth, but we've built our society and culture to make us comfortable.
Right.
And physical discomfort is something that a lot of people steer away from, and that's okay. But these are just barriers that one can kind of set up for themselves, right? As far as starting and being successful with a health and fitness routine long term, it's starting small-ish, meaning, and being realistic with the time and effort you have to put in, but being consistent with it. So if I say I'm going to just go all of a sudden to the gym for an hour every day, starting Monday, that's a pretty big lift, right?
For someone brand new, yeah.
For somebody who's brand new, one. For somebody maybe who doesn't have a plan, two. For somebody who has a lot of other things going on in their life, if there's work, if there's kids, if there's whatever it is. For, somebody who's single in their mid-20s, has time on their hands, like maybe going to the gym for an hour before work every day is not that big of a deal. So just being realistic with what time, especially initially, I can put into this, and giving yourself that time and being consistent with it, whether it's 20 minutes, right? I'm going to give myself 20 minutes every day. And I use that term rather than make myself do it, but give yourself that time, right? This is your time. You're filling your glass. Give yourself 20 minutes a day. And if it's, again, I'm kind of speaking from the point of doing something for an at-home workout right now. If you do decide to go to the gym, great. Whatever that time is, but make it something that you have time for. And then two is have some sort of plan. Now, if that is a structured training program that you get from, an in-person trainer or an online trainer, great. Even if it's having your Peloton classes planned out for the week, and even if it's a 20-minute walk, a 5-minute stretch, a 20-minute, arms class, whatever it is, make that plan for the week. So all you have to do is show up now. One of the most kind of frustrating things personally for somebody is stepping into a situation thinking they're going to do something really good for themselves and then not knowing how to execute and what exactly to do. And you can go to the gym and be like, there's so much going on here. I'm just going to go walk on the treadmill, which is great.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that.
Great. Nothing wrong with that. But if you have a plan to say, this is the day I walk on the treadmill versus this is the day I go do my upper body lift and this is exactly what it is. Having a plan, that's why having 5 exercises written down or having a class you're going to take, having a plan is really, really, really important, especially if you're just kind of getting into something. And I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. And when I step into whatever my exercise for the day is with a plan, it always goes better than if I walk into the gym and I'm just like, okay, I'm going to do a little something, you know. And sometimes you need that space. And if you have a really rigid training structure, if you're training for something, you know, performance-based event, or if you have a very rigid structure most of the time, sometimes you need those days where you're just like, I'm going to go mess around.
Yeah.
Cool. But even if it's a loose plan, say I'm going to do 10 minutes on the cardio, I'm going to do 10 minutes messing around with kettlebells and then stretch for 10 minutes. That's enough of a plan for somebody like me who can fill in those gaps. And then, so we have realistic time commitment, having a plan of some kind. And then the one thing I'll say too, and I struggle with this often, and I think a lot of people do, is having compassion and not beating yourself up when things don't go perfectly.
I struggle with that too.
Right?
Just this morning.
Yeah.
Yeah, I woke up this morning and I was like, all right, I'm going to get a workout in. I try to get workouts in before. So I try to train every single day to varying degrees of intensity because recovery is important. But on days where I'm filming, I try to get a workout in the morning before the taping. And this morning I got into the gym and I just had no willpower to do anything. And I got on an elliptical and I was like, all right, I'm just going to do this thing for 20, 30 minutes. I'll probably be on my phone checking emails, but I'm moving my body. And even if it wasn't the best workout I've had, I showed up.
You showed up.
I moved my body.
Yeah. And so that's a great example of showing up, pivoting, or, you know, being flexible, right? Within, you showed up and you spent your allotted amount of time doing something. And even there's nothing wrong with that. You know, you say, this is what I need for today. And we can call it auto-regulation in training, which is, you know, kind of adjusting the training based on how your body's feeling, where your nervous system at, where your muscles are at. But there's a mental side of that too. And it's, you know, there is the balance between that compassion and complacency, right? Of, okay, I'm just going to kind of like roll through the motions again versus today I need this, or this is what I can give today and I'm going to give it. So, you know, not beating yourself up over things not going right, over you feeling like you didn't get the best workout in, over I don't feel like whatever your metrics you're using to gauge success, whether it's weight you're losing, weight you're lifting, speed you're running, I think those things have to be, keeping metrics is important so you can make sure you're on the right path. But especially when you're just starting out, time commitment and showing up for that amount of time and putting in effort is a far greater sign of future success and it's not going to mess with your head as much than worrying about the pounds coming off or the weight going up or the speed going up or whatever it is. You know, if you can pat yourself on the back sincerely and say, I did a great job this week. If I showed up for each one of those 30-minute blocks of time, maybe one day I'm just stretched because my body was really sore and I needed that. That's fine. But I showed up and I did it, versus, you know, checking the scale every day or checking, you know, the metrics every day.
Can you tell people why it's bad to check the scale every day? It surprises me still that people will go on a scale sometimes twice a day. Yeah. And that's their only metric for how well or how poorly they're doing.
Yeah. I mean, listen, the scale should be you know, I don't want to put a time frame on how often because everybody's kind of goals are different, but the human body is going to fluctuate 2 to 5 pounds every day based on water weight, based on what you eat, based on how much you slept. So, if you're weighing yourself every day, then it's a total invalid measurement of what is actually happening. Listen, if you're preparing for a bodybuilding competition and you're like in your last 3 weeks and that's a different story. If you're doing a high performance, if you're racing and or you're in a weightlifting competition and you need to know how much I'm weighing because I got to weigh in, it's a different story.
Sure.
For most people, including myself, who are just trying to stay generally fit and also trying to keep tabs on how I'm doing, what my body is feeling like, how my lean muscle to body fat percentage is, weekly, bi-weekly check-ins, great. But every day it's not your natural fluctuation is going to it's going to change regardless.
I mean, I remember, and I say this because I was one of those people who would just consistently check the scale multiple times a day. And that was my main measuring system for how well I was doing, especially on keto, because it was nice because when I did keto really hardcore, I would see the scale numbers tick down rather consistently. And I was like, oh, this is kind of addictive.
Yes.
And then suddenly I would plateau and there'd be like a week or two where I would either not lose anything or I would go up. And it drove me insane because I was like, this is not making any sense. I look in the mirror, I feel like I look leaner, but the scale is telling me something different. And then it took me finally understanding that while I may have been shedding fat, I'm also converting that into muscle, and muscle weighs more. And so that's why your body weight will fluctuate. Plus, like you said, food, how much you've slept the night before, how much you've eaten. Like, there's so many different variables. If you're just feeling bloated for whatever reason that day because of something you ate, so there's so many variables to all of that. If someone comes to you and says, I need help, I want to start losing weight, right? I want to get fitter, but my main goal is to lose weight. What do you say to those people? How do they start?
So I'm going to preface this by saying I'm not a weight loss expert.
Okay.
Listen, I've helped a lot of people, especially in my personal training days, like lose a fair amount of weight, put on a fair amount of muscle. What I do now, it's a component of weight loss,
right?
The exercise component of it. Whether you're trying to gain an appreciable amount of muscle or lose any amount of body fat, nutrition, what you put in your body, how many calories and what those calories consist of. And there's so many, slightly varying opinions on, what if high quality, low calorie, what makes a difference there. But at the end of the day, you need to be eating, clean food, healthy food, fewer calories than what your body needs to maintain the weight that you are at.
Yeah.
The actual exercise component is important, but you can go on a caloric deficit and lose weight.
Right. Is
it probably better to have exercise involved in your life when you're on that journey? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. Getting a hold of, what you're eating, how much you're eating, why you're eating, and again, this is whether it's food, whether it's drinking, whether it's anything that you're doing you're putting into yourself that maybe isn't good for you. There's so much going on inside each one of us that doing a little bit of digging and understanding a little bit of or a lot of the whys behind why I'm doing this, why I feel the need to eat so much or drink or watch this or escape that way, right, or whatever it is, because it's always a Band-Aid, over a big wound until we start to really dig and figure out what's going on in here. that is, one, has caused us to initiate these behaviors, and then two, how do we change them?
Yeah. Eating is such an important habit. Or not, sorry. Eating is such an important
It's part of our culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go out and socialize, it's typically around food. It's
Yep.
typically around alcohol,
Food or alcohol,
sugar, and all of that can significantly mess up. You could be training. You can have an incredibly rigid, an incredibly prepared and planned out training schedule, and you could eat cleanly, and then you go out for a dinner and you splurge, and it kind of undoes most of what you've worked for. And it took me a long time to learn the importance. That was kind of the whole transition to doing keto for the first time, was understanding the importance of nutrition. Just simply what I put into my body. Going for an afternoon snack and having a bag of chips versus maybe some vegetables or a salad or a cup of yogurt with some fruits, right? Like there's so many different variables that exist there. I wanted to ask you about kettlebells, because they seem to be growing in popularity. And I don't know if it's just because I'm actively thinking about them and searching them up online, like different techniques with them. But now every time I've come across, a content creator or a fitness instructor, someone who knows what they're doing, they're often talking about the importance of kettlebells and why they're so good at actually helping train your body, whether you want to lean out, whether you want to build strength or functionality. Why is that?
So, and it's funny that it's, kind of making, I guess a little bit of a resurgence now.
Yeah. Because it's not a new thing. Just
well,
for
it's
the
certainly
record.
not a new thing.
Yeah.
And nothing, I don't want to say nothing in fitness is new, but a lot of the stuff that
It's been around. Yeah.
It just goes in cycles, right? And, when I first got certified in kettlebells, it's like 2009, 2010. And that was kind of the late 2000s. It was this kind of the functional fitness kind of craze, late 2000s, and then kind of early into the teens there. And kettlebells were kind of a big part of that.
Yeah.
And I don't know exactly where they went, but you're not the first conversation I've had that's like, hey, kettlebells are like all over the place these days again. So they're kind of making a comeback, I guess. Yeah. And listen, I love training with kettlebells. They are by no means the only thing and the only way I would train, or the only way I would recommend that somebody only train with kettlebells. And I'm personally not like a very dogmatic person in approach. Like I like pulling things from everywhere and saying like, okay, what works for you? This is great. Yeah. But as far as why they work so well, they have the way they're built and the way you use them. There's just this kind of magic blend of conditioning and strength work because of the ballistic movements with the swings and the cleans and the snatches that really get the heart rate up, and then combining those with just the classic strength moves with like a double rack front squat, overhead pressing. You can row with the kettlebells. You can do so many things with them, but it's that cool combination of strength work, conditioning, and then it also really allows you, the way they sit on your hand, we call it like stacking joints. Like you can carry a kettlebell overhead with a locked arm. You see people do the Turkish get-ups or carrying things overhead. You can put them in positions that really help work the stability aspect of joints also. So it's a really versatile tool. You can have a heavy, I use like a heavy and a medium-ish kettlebell, however you want to classify those for, an individual. You can have 2 kettlebells and you can get a whole lot done. I'd say you can get a lot more done with those 2 kettlebells than you can with 2 single dumbbells of kind of similar-ish weight. Now, right. Can you do swings and snatches with dumbbells? Yes, of course. Can you do cleans with dumbbells? Sure. Does it feel as smooth and as natural? And the way you can kind of rack a kettlebell and let your grip rest for a little bit while it's in the rack position, then go back to doing another set of swings or cleans, then overhead press it and walk around with it for a little bit. Like you can really challenge yourself in a bigger variety of ways. Now there are some limits to, I can't stack on as much weight on the kettlebell as I can do on a barbell. If I'm trying to
Right.
work some top end strength, they're maybe not quite as good for hypertrophy. It's tougher to like do curls with kettlebells, and like you can do a chest press, but dumbbells feel better doing a chest.
Sure.
But there's certain moves that feel better doing with dumbbells versus kettlebells versus barbells, and that's just kind of how it works. But they do have a wonderful way of combining, the cardio conditioning element of training with the strength element that I don't think many other individual like implements or modalities do.
I'm curious, as you were talking about combining conditioning with strength training, I'm kind of at that point now in my fitness journey where I want to put on some muscle mass, but I want to stay as lean as possible. And I'm struggling to find the balance between the two. I do a lot of cardio. I do a lot of running. I don't enjoy running, but I've been doing a lot of it. And at the same time, I've noticed a difference in terms of starting to lean out a little more here and there, but I'm finding it harder to put on mass all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And I don't want to, similar to you, have a very, very low carb diet where most days I don't have carbs, period.
Okay.
So when I talk to certain, bodybuilders, they'll say something like, oh, you're going to have to significantly up what you're eating and introduce carbs. And I'm like, but I don't want to do that. So I'm like struggling in between. And so when you say something like kettlebells have the ability to give you both conditioning and strength training, for someone like me, for example, what I just described, would those be an optimal tool to use and to start introducing into my training?
Yeah. I mean, I think, as I said, try it. But
Yeah.
I think, so one, those guys you talk to about, if you want to put on any sort of mass, it's really hard to put on weight without enough carbohydrates in your system.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay,
it's
so there's
really
no way
tough.
around
It's
it.
really tough.
Okay.
Protein and fat are great for maintaining muscle mass.
Yeah.
Fat is great for energy that's not at the, high intensity, kind of like high glycolytic demand, which is that like high intensity conditioning type stuff. But you can use your, fat for, obviously aerobic system work, general lifting, stuff like that. But that's one of the biggest kind of downfalls of trying to put on weight while trying to be lean.
Right.
Is not having enough carbohydrates in the system to allow for that growth. So, and again, you have to prioritize like what your goal is. There's going to maybe be a little give and take with, not to say you need to go put on, more fat weight when you're getting, when you're trying to put on muscle. You don't need to do that, but there is it's a tightrope to
Sure.
walk that line.
Yeah, it seems like it.
But the first thing I would say is like, yes, you're going to need some carbohydrates, maybe a little more than you have now in your system, if you want to actually like grow muscle. You need a caloric surplus at some level.
Interesting.
As far as the kettlebells themselves, there's some great programs out there. Some old school RKC programs, like Return to the Kettlebell 2, which are like mass
Sounds
building
like a movie.
programs. Yeah, I know it is. It sounds like a movie. And it's just really simple. It's cleans, using double kettlebells. It's heavy cleans,
Yeah.
heavy presses, high rep squats and deadlifts. Nothing fancy, but just like putting the muscles to work.
Yeah.
I'm excited. I'm moving out of the city soon and we bought a house, Rebecca and I, so I'm going to have a little garage space and yard space to like
Nice.
use some kettlebells, and
Yeah.
I'm excited to get after it and just see. I just remember from historically training when I would train with double kettlebells often, and just doing the simple things, nothing super fancy, clean squats, overhead presses, some rows and some deadlifts. You definitely I felt like, at least for me, putting on muscle, also the ability to kind of stay lean within that, nutrition and diet,
Yeah.
depending on a lot of that. But so again, it's a tool. And one thing I will say also, if it's a new stimulus to your system, if it's something you haven't been doing, you may find great results, especially in the short to like medium term,
Right.
because it's a new stimulus to your body. And it's like, wow, this is, even though I've been doing some sort of hip hinging and some sort of pressing, it's a nuanced newness to it that the body's like, okay, I got to react to this. I got to put on some muscle. I got to figure out how to like adapt to this stress. So, and that's just, training in general, like whether you're oscillating the weights you're lifting and the reps, the exercises you're using, to a point, you can't do it every day, or you don't develop you don't train for long enough to develop that stress response. But, again, that's something. Try it out, eat a little more carbs, and like start kettlebell front squats and overhead presses and pull-ups. And like, you'll probably put on some weight if you're lifting heavy enough and with enough volume.
Yeah.
And then again, if you keep those things really simple, the heavy lift days, there's less that can kind of go wrong and throw you off, and you have fewer variables to figure out like, oh, what do I need to adjust? If you're doing 15 different exercises every time you go in for a workout, sometimes it's harder to like, and you do that 4 or 5 times a week, sometimes it's harder to pinpoint like what I need to change if something isn't working.
Oh, interesting. So you're saying you should almost focus on like less different types of workouts, like do a handful of them, but really focus in on those ones, as opposed to saying going in and, to your point, doing like 14 different.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something said for variety, and I think meaning the exercises that you're like, these are the ones I'm going to track my weights, track my reps, so I have a pretty clear, guidance of how to progress from here.
Yeah.
Keep some variety in your training outside of that. Some things don't even bother, tracking on. Have some fun when you're, if you're going for your runs, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But the big meat and potato lifts, and listen, some people like tracking every single thing. For me, it's like, okay, if I have my 3 big lifts and I know where I'm going with those, and I know I just need to kind of feel good doing some accessory work, and then I just go mess around and get a little bit of like mobility, some body weight stuff in. It's a little different for everybody, but this is one way of going about it also, but it can be much easier to say, okay, I have these like 4 moves that I'm doing. I'm going to do them 3 times a week.
Yeah.
And I'm going to just see where, I have my plan on these 4 moves. The rest of this stuff, I'm going to give myself a little bit of freedom, feel good, give my body what it needs, whether it's a run, some mobility, a little more core work, something like that. But I have my main meat and potatoes is what I'm tracking,
right,
for this particular training cycle, at least.
Is there, from your perspective, can we talk about recovery?
Yeah.
Because it seems like it's becoming more and more of a prevalent thing. I remember a time for me, again, I'm going to keep using myself as the example here, the guinea pig, where I didn't believe in recovery. I was just like, no, you push as hard as you can, and even if you're sore, you go again.
Oh, the 20s, right?
Yeah, exactly. And now as I've gotten a little bit older, I'm like, oh man, like I ran a 10-kilometer obstacle course race, the Spartan race, this past weekend. And immediately after that race, I was in the compression boots, like those Normatecs, and I was in that for almost like an hour and a half, and I cycled through that multiple times, did a whole bunch of stretching, a sauna, and the next day I was like, all right, I could theoretically run again.
Yeah.
And in the past, I was never able to do that. I was out for a week.
Yeah.
Why is recovery so important, in your words?
One, you just said it, is that, it allows us to get back to training at intensity sooner. It keeps our bodies healthier through our training journey and lifetime. And I think that's probably the number one. It's going to extend the length of your ability to train throughout your life.
Yeah.
If you are prioritizing these recovery days, if you are waiving your intensities of your training, as you go through training throughout the week and the month. But again, it's like you're going to eat a bunch of, junk food and try to train hard. You're only going to get so much results, right? So, on the flip side of that, if you're going to train hard and then not give your body a little nice push that it needs to get some blood flow, get some range of motion back, and that, it's going to allow you to come back sooner. It's going to allow you to train for longer. and feel better all the way through. That's the goal of recovery. And recovery is going to be different than rest also. And that's something that I think people are kind of wrapping their heads around now, and it maybe has taken a little while to get there. But, sometimes you just need a rest day. If you're smoked, if your nervous system is like shot and you're just like, I just need to like rest today. That's one thing. Okay. We all need those days.
Yep.
But recovery, or we call it, active recovery, I think is a great term for it, because you're actually doing something to promote that recovery process. And, the two main things for me with recovery are blood flow and range of motion. So we can get blood flow a number of ways, right? You can go in the Normatec boots. Yep. That's something pushing the blood in and out, up and down. And I say blood flow, that's also pushing all that, metabolic debris that you built up over your run or your lifting or whatever it is. So just kind of letting blood, nutrient-rich blood, come back in, flushing all this kind of, there's like, the swelling or inflammation that's in your muscle belly and your subcutaneous skin, like moving that around. And that can be a boots, that can be a massage, foam roller, some have different degrees of effectiveness, but blood flow also internally, a little bit of heart rate. So gentle cardio can be wonderful for helping the body recover. And that can be just an easy ride on the bike. If you feel, if you just did an obstacle course run, maybe going for, a 20-minute jog doesn't feel the best. So maybe you hop on the bike or an elliptical, something like that. Yeah. Gentle, again, heart rate, just getting the blood flowing. This is like zone 1, 2 max heart rate kind of stuff, like nothing crazy, just gentle. And then range of motion. So most of the things we do are kind of within a limited range of motion on repeat, right? With some different exposures here or there. Yeah. But if we can take, my magic for recovery is like 15 to 20 minutes gentle cardio, 10 to 20 minutes mobility work. If you can put those together, and the mobility, again, regaining range of motion actively. Stretching is great too, but teaching your body and showing your body that, yes, I can like actively regain that range of motion is really important, like from a neuromuscular aspect, to say like, okay, I'm still strong here. Yeah. It also gives you a chance to kind of observe where you're at, right? If you had a game or a race, or you just had a hard lifting week and you're doing your mobility routine and it's like, my shoulder's a little cranky, maybe I should pay attention to this. Or feeling a little tightness in my hip, maybe I should give it a little more love. It allows you to have those a little quieter moments where you're not in the thick of it. The body isn't all zapped up on adrenaline, covering up anything that's, gone wrong. Yep. So just and gives you a chance to kind of have some quiet moments and reflect also, on both a physical and emotional and mental standpoint. Where you can take that time to be like, man, that was like, I really pushed hard in that endurance, like that obstacle race. That was cool. That was a great challenge. Yeah. If there's something you think you could have done better, great, look at it objectively. But it's nice to have some time, some quiet moments where we're not like so worried about getting after it, but we know you're doing something really good for your body. Just like a meditation would. Yeah. Similar idea. The recovery is kind of can be a meditative process where you have some reflection and in a little slower movement, quiet time, you get to kind of, again, check in with yourself after something that's been a little more intense.
Well, it's interesting because a couple days after the race was on a Saturday, so on the Monday, it was a holiday here in Canada, and I went to the gym with my partner, and I have these noise canceling earbuds, and I didn't play any music, I didn't listen to any podcasts, I just turned on the noise canceling feature, so like it drowned out all the other noise, and all I did was just sort of reflect on, like, as I was moving through the gym and doing stuff like, okay, how am I feeling here? Like, is this working? I was intentionally trying not to distract myself with anything else, so I can really check in with my body and be like, all right, how am I feeling after that race? Like, where am I tight? Where am I sore? So it's interesting to do that kind of experiment with yourself after, to your point, like a heavy lift or a race or a game or anything like that.
Yeah, I would even say that doing something like that on a regular basis
So important.
for most of us is really important.
Yeah.
You know, we're surrounded by input in this world.
So much
you know,
information.
so
and
much
noise
information.
everywhere, yeah.
You know, you have your earbuds in, you know, maybe you're listening to music, probably you have a podcast on or an audiobook
Yeah.
or a TikTok or whatever it is. There's always stuff coming in that we're processing, and like that's great. We need input to process and become creative and thoughtful with. But you know, I sometimes I have the headphones, and sometimes I'll put them on and like forget to turn on whatever I'm doing, or if I'm walking the dogs, I'll turn it off for a minute and just like I just have nothing in my ear, and I'm just like, you know, 10 minutes goes by and I'm like, wow, this is
Nice.
amazing.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and doing that, you know, proactively and thoughtfully of like, I'm spending 30 minutes with nothing going. And yes, this could be a meditation,
Yeah.
but again, it's also nice to have that out in reality,
Sure.
in real life, whether you're, you know, walking to work, walking the dogs, doing
Just that moment to check in
just
with
in
yourself.
the gym,
Yeah.
and you're in the world, but nobody's yelling at you,
Yeah.
right? And if you're yelling at yourself, maybe that's something
To work through.
to you know, to observe, be curious about, and figure out why that's happening. If you're speaking gently to yourself, that's great. If you're thinking about other things, then that's probably what you should be thinking about, because that's what's naturally coming in at that point. So, you know, it's just, I love that you did that. And it just reminds me of like, we all need a little more time
With ourselves.
with ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I really appreciate you making the time to have this conversation with me.
Hey, awesome. This is a pleasure to be here. And thanks for having me.
No, of course. It was a pleasure. I was learning a ton as you were talking, and I'd love to do a part 2 the next time you're in the city.
Anytime. I'd love to. Toronto's been great. I'm only here for a very short trip, but
Yeah.
it's a lovely city. I can't
We'll
wait
have
to
to
come
do
back.
it again.
Absolutely.
Where can people find you?
So
Like they want to learn from you, your socials.
yeah, my Instagram's at Andy Speer.
Okay.
All one word. That's pretty much where I live. So best place to find me there.
Incredible. I appreciate your time.
And of course on the Peloton platform.
Exactly. Safe travels back to New York. Good luck with the house.
Thank you.
And we'll chat again soon, my friend.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.